Ali naravno to bi to otprilike ovako što ima se veći. Ono, tip više.
Vidi, mikrofon je jedan njoj napred. Ako želiš okrenuti cijelu za 180 još. Ajde ga pitajte da vidimo nego što krenemo.
Ili nas čujete? Profesor Šlaus?
Je li me sada čujete?
Čujemo.
Dobro, fino, hvala.
Hvala vama.
Hello.
Hey, hello, hello, Nora.
Hello.
To Georgia.
Dobar dan.
Pozdrav, pozdrav, Aleksandar.
Lijep pozdrav.
Je li problem da odavde govorimo?
Ne, ali pazim.
Sve je to.
Dobro, ajde.
Kreni se tome.
Dobro.
So, shall we start? Okay. Dear colleagues, I'm happy to open this conference organized by the Croatian Association of the Club of Rome with the support of the University of Zagreb and of the Ministry of Science and Education. As we announced, this conference is dedicated to the role of the academic community in promoting peace. We will try to answer the key question: how scientists can contribute to ensuring peace, dialogue, and coexistence at local, regional, and international levels. We expect vivid discussions between different academic disciplines, from the humanities to the natural and social sciences. It is important that it is happening in these beautiful premises of the Inter-University Center in Dubrovnik. This institution was founded 50 years ago in the time of Cold War. And the main goal of this institution was to be meeting point of the scientists from both sides of the war, in this time of Cold War. And now we are threatened with again who knows the Cold War in the near future. So, well, I will not speak about now. All papers presented here at the conference will be published in the conference proceedings. Furthermore, the best scientific papers will be submitted for publication in an internationally recognized academic journal. Now, a few words will say the main organizer of the conference, Professor Goran Bartos.
Thank you, Gary. I hope you can hear me here. So, dear friends, I'm welcome to Zagreb, welcome to Dubrovnik in the name of the University of Zagreb and our rector, Professor Damir Boras. University of Zagreb is one of the oldest university in the Central European region, and is the oldest in Croatia. 350 years old university is actually something unique in Europe, not only in this region. We are very lucky to have 8,000 professors and 70,000 students. It's our responsibility for our region, for Europe, not only for Croatia. And when we are talking about our responsibilities, one of the main responsibilities connected in Europe and to have the bridge between the nations, to make dialogue and to promote peace. When we are talking about promoting the peace, this building is probably one of the most important for University of Zagreb. It is Inter-University Center Dubrovnik. As Hrvoje already said, it's 50 years. We are celebrating this year 50 years of Inter-University Center Dubrovnik. But what is actually behind Inter-University Center Dubrovnik? It's promoting the peace, promoting the dialogue between European nations. In the time of the Cold War, University of Zagreb and Rector Supek, famous Rector Supek, they got the idea how to make dialogue between the nation in Europe in the time of the Cold War. And it was possible to support academic institutions, to support professors and students, to welcome all here from the East and from the West of Europe in this period of the Cold War. And somehow University of Zagreb believed that we supported peace in this time of the wars, in the Cold Wars, and we are lucky actually to support this future of peace conferences as a series of conferences in the period when Europe is next to, and we hope it is not, but somehow we are in the next period of some Cold War again. When we are talking about university only shortly, we truly believe we need to come back and trust to science. It's something very serious when we are talking about pandemic situation, but not only. The second thing, what we think is very important and crucial for this, especially for this conference, and that is peace has not good alternative. Welcome you once again. We wish you all good conference. We will be happy to hear very good presentations, and we are expecting great discussion. Thank you. Professor Schlaus, academic Schlaus. Yes. So we are so lucky to have academic Schlaus with us. Academic Schlaus is one of the most important persons for this building here, for Inter-University Center, but one of the most important scientists in the world. Allow me to say that he was the president of the World Academy. He has so many different affiliation. One of them is his Croatian member in Club of Rome. It is only one Croatian who has lucky to have influence on the world through the Club of Rome. Professor Schlaus, academic Schlaus, will give us a lecture on promoting of peace, on what is the future of peace and what is the future of dialogue. And he will come to the question of our challenges. Professor Schlaus, please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me all?
Yes.
Dear friends, dear participants, I decided somewhat to change the title from Remember Your Humanity and Forget the Rest into, according to the aim of this conference, the duty of academia, and actually I should say the duty of all of us in realizing this imperative statement: remember your humanity and forget the rest. I apologize, but I will quote extensively from this document because it is so important. Here it is. We are speaking on this occasion not as a member of one, of this or that nation, continent, or creed, but as human beings, members of the species man, whose continuous existence is in doubt. Here then is the problem which we present to you, stark, dreadful, and inescapable. Shall we put an end to the human race, or shall mankind renounce war? Let me emphasize, renounce war. And then the abolition of war will demand distasteful limitations of national sovereignty. But what perhaps impedes understanding is the term mankind. What do we mean by the term mankind? Of course, many argue that it would be enough to prohibit weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, biological, chemical, and so on. However, this is not enough because if the war are allowed to continue, provided modern weapons, even if weapons of mass destruction are forbidden, it is illusory that we will somehow escape the dreadful consequences. And then they continue, there lies before us, if we choose continual progress in happiness, knowledge, and wisdom, shall we instead choose death because we cannot forget our quarrels? We appeal as human beings to human beings, remember your humanity and forget the rest. If you can do so, the way lies open to a new paradise. If you cannot, there lies before you a risk of universal death. Now, what are the main duty of academia, and actually I would say of all of us engaged in the teaching process, and actually all of us? The first and most important is precisely to understand the full meaning of the Russell-Einstein Manifesto, which now is as important as it was many decades ago when they wrote it. What does it mean? And of course, let me say, what do we mean, since they asked that question, by humanity? Human beings have made tremendous progress in the actually 10,000 years, several 10,000 years, and they have made this progress through three important qualities. One is empathy, the other is curiosity, and the third is creativity. All of them are deeply rooted in our biology, in our genetic code. And not only that, all of them actually somehow we inherit from our animal ancestor who also have these qualities. In a process of development, human beings have developed various institutions, social and emotional intelligence, a number of things which are very important. For us, they have, as a matter of fact, also invented war. And as you see, war is not something that is part of us, is not genetically embedded in us. It is our creation, and in much the same way as we made it, we can actually abolish it. Now, the duty of academia are transforming our world. This is precisely what was 7 years ago, one of the most important declarations of the UN General Assembly, transforming our world, sustainable development goals. We don't know whether this transformation will be incremental or paradigmatic. Likely, both of these components will be present. We only know that we have only few decades at our disposal before our natural and human capital are destroyed. Any change actually gets winner and losers. And this is a rather distasteful thing, because those who are losers obviously will somehow be against this process of transformation. We cannot afford that. We have actually to proceed very quickly with the transformation, and that implies that, speaking now in the language of the game theory, it should be a win-win game rather than a zero-sum game. And of course, the worst will be the game where everybody will be lose. Nowadays, actually, war are inconceivable. I had the honor to participate in a debate with General Colin Powell in 2009 at the meeting in Istanbul. And when most of the people expected disagreement between, after all, the commanding general of the US Army, he at that time was just ended his term as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but previously he was the head of the Joint Chief of Staff, and I, who come actually from academia, from Pagbash. However, we agreed from the very beginning, the war today is inconceivable, and most important, it is useless. We pointed out that all war after Second World War were useless, with a possible exception of the Gulf One, which actually had a very limited scope, and they, of course, accomplished that scope. Wars in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, everywhere, all of these wars actually were useless, and strangely enough, the superpower was actually forced to retrieve from all of these wars. In other words, they lost these wars. When we compare the duties of the academies now, emphasizing remember your humanity and forget the rest, and compare with the duties of the academies, let's say 2 centuries ago, where most of the academies, including our academy and the academy of all of our neighbors, were established, is the following. At that time, actually, it was important to stress the identity of each of these states. And of course, one important thing was also the question of the language. Now, actually, it is the world, and we'll come again and again to this important point. The Pagbash movement established some 50 years ago the Doomsday Clock, which is put on the front page of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist, and is usually at the beginning of the year, typically March, when it is decided how close we are to our total destruction. This year, on March the 7th, actually the board decided that we are 100 seconds away from doomsday, and this is the third in a row that we are unfortunately as close. Now, who are those who are responsible for war? Of course, let me make this very clear. We cannot hide behind the idea that there is aggressor or something like that. That was before World War II and during the World War II. Now we are all responsible. Unless we change the political and economic structure we have, unless we transform them, we are all responsible for wars. But very specifically, the instigators are those producing weapons, selling them and disseminating them and earning profit from that. Those comparing various weapons, theirs and ours, and see which one has advantages. And then, of course, incompetent, criminal, and stupid politicians. Clearly, there is no winner in a case of nuclear war. Nuclear war is really a total disaster for humankind that would destroy not only us as human beings, but our entire environment, and make the Earth, our only habitat, really impossible to live. Why is that so? Because the only way for the war to go on is the so-called mutually assured destruction, having a curious acronym, MAD, mutually assured destruction, which means that the superpower, and that means the United States and the Russian Federation, previously USSR, have enough weapons to destroy each other regardless of who is the first to use the first nuclear weapons. So the commandment, no first use and so on, are very useful. They are still something that are far from being enough. There are questions, of course, to put the level also whether one could make the use of nuclear weapons illegal, and the effort now, due to PAGWASH and many other organizations, and ICANN as well, the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, now it is declared by the UN General Assembly to be actually forbidden, to be illegal. And of course, it is also totally immoral. Besides, war with nuclear weapons started by those who have it, particularly those who have it a lot, and they actually can start such a war since half of the weapons, nuclear weapons, are on what is called hair trigger alert, which means that they can be launched very, very quickly. Of course, it is a chain of command, controlled and so on, but still within hours or few hours, our world can be destroyed. The effect of such a destruction may be, and which triggered, by the way, the Russell-Einstein Manifesto and the PAGWASH meeting, was the so-called Bikini Test, which was the test which occurred in 1954, so less than 10 years after Hiroshima. It was an American test, but soon the Soviet test followed, resulting in what is called Tsar bomb, the largest bomb ever made. The bomb that was dropped on Bikini actually is 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. And the effects are tremendous. The effect is that the boat, fishing boat, Lucky Dragon, Japanese, which was fishing about 150 miles away, was affected by that. One person immediately died, and all the other became seriously ill. Citizens of Marshall Island, and that is about 120 miles away from the Bikini Atoll, also suffered enormous effect. And also the citizens of Kazakhstan, particularly the area where Soviet did these tests. And this is the reason why Kazakhstan very promptly decided to remove all nuclear weapons. What are the most common effects? Most common effects is that people and animals and other on the island of Marshall suffer from birth defects. The most common defects have been the so-called jellyfish babies, born with no bones and with transparent skin. Their brains and beating hearts can be seen. The babies usually live a day or two before stop breathing. So much about the famous Roman saying, si vis pacem para bellum. No, we have to totally forget about the war, and we have to consider that we are all responsible for whatever the situation is that can bring us to war. In 1995, Pugwash and its president, Joe Rothblatt, got the Nobel Prize for their efforts. And of course, the Russell-Einstein Manifesto was the most important thing. To just bring back this idea, what if we would forbid nuclear weapons? It took only 4 years for the United States, at a time when it was not even sure that the bomb can be made, to make the bomb. It also took less than 4 years for Soviets to get the same bomb. So that knowledge is present. There is no way to forget or to exclude this knowledge. In his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, Sir Joseph said, "The quest for a war-free world has a basic purpose, survival, our survival. But if in the process we can learn to achieve it by love rather than by fear, by kindness rather than compulsion, if in a process we can learn to combine the essential with the enjoyable, the expedient with the benevolent, the practical with the beautiful, this will be an extra incentive to embark on this great task. Above all, remember your humanity." Because the use of thermonuclear weapons is not only genocidal, but omnicidal, namely involved all living creatures on Earth. Let us emphasize that the contemporary world is the best ever. Humans have achieved quite a lot in those 10,000 years, and they have particularly achieved a lot in the last 200 years. And we had also attempted to improve what is our best system. And our best system that we have is capitalism and representative democracy. Now, the countries that are the countries that represent disagreements among themselves are so-called free countries and dictatorship. And usually under dictatorship, we put USSR and now Russian Federation, and among free world, everybody else. This is not necessarily quite so. The free world is very far from that. As a matter of fact, the Freedom of the World publication puts regularly each year the list of those that are more and those that are less free. And as a matter of fact, several countries have deteriorated. It is actually, as quoted by John Avery, very interesting that Victoria Nuland, who was at that time American representative, in her speech in December 2013, talked about democracy and actually emphasized Maidan as an exclusively democratic effect. And she overlooked the fact that very important components there were people from the Svoboda party, and that they had rules, the so-called Social National Party of Ukraine, and they very emphasized the name is very, very similar to that of the Nazi party in Germany. The world today as we said, is very close to doomsday. And it's interesting to remember one chapter in a book of Claudio Magris, Alphabeti, who said that one among the first laws of the Jewish people was do not obey false idols. And unfortunately, many of those, forget the rest, are false idols. Many of them are valuable. Just to make the analogy with physics, of course, we know that classical physics in a way have to be superseded by the theory of relativity and by quantum physics, but many things in the classical physics are still valuable. Let me conclude this part by quoting what 110 Nobel laureates wrote at the beginning of this century. It is time to turn our back on unilateral search for security, in which we seek to shelter behind walls. To survive in this world, we must learn to think in a different way. As never before, the future of each depends on a good of all. This is not an easy command. And though we are all aware of the fact that we need more freedom than market capitalism gives us, and that we need more democracy than the representative democracy gives us, because there is still among us some desire for profit and conquest, to extend our territories, to get resources, to become superpower, and so on. And in many countries, people still praise Alexander the Great, Caesar, Genghis Khan, all the way to Napoleon. It is interesting that Erasmus, who actually lived even before Napoleon, wrote that the only difference between Caesar and the common criminal is that Caesar killed more people. But of course, Erasmus is centuries ahead of his time. In a world loaded with weapons of mass destruction, conquest is suicidal. In a global world, conquest is stupidity, since we are each responsible for the entire planet, and this planet is ours anyway, without a need to conquer it. It is often said that humans are inclined to violence. This is not true. The Seville Declaration, published in 1986, signed by an enormous number of leading scientists, actually declares that violence is not genetically embedded in us. War is a social construct made by humans and can be eliminated by humans. And Wilson wrote, aggressive behavior, especially its more dangerous form of military action and criminal assault, are learned, but that learning is prepared. We are predisposed to slide into irrational hostility under certain conditions. These rules have evolved during the past 100,000 years of human evolution. However, these rules are now obsolete. We mentioned actually that many philosophers were concerned with the idea how to establish peaceful society. And Immanuel Kant formulated three conditions for the peaceful society. The first one is the existence of weapons destructive enough to destroy humankind. Second is interdependent economic relationship among many, ideally almost all countries, and the political leadership of states that realizes what actually their citizens want. The first condition is fulfilled. We have that weapon. It is enormous interconnection. We are all interconnected by trade, as we see now with gas, oil, and so on. One of the problems certainly is inadequate political leadership, and Pew and Gallup and various other polls done actually through decades, but most recently in 2017, 2019, 2020, showed that about 70% of the people are dissatisfied with the way how their country goes. They are dissatisfied with their own government. They do not think that they are properly led. And the reasons are many, of course. In most elections, the percentage of those that vote is appreciably below 100%, which means that those that win are by far not the majority. Second, we still cling to the idea those that win the election really are masters for 4 or 5 or whatever years. This is totally against what founding fathers believed. And if you read the founding fathers' papers, they always emphasize not the winning of the election, not the election itself, but much more the checks and balances. Membership in political party also dropped during the last decades. Candidates are selected, candidates to be selected are often of very low quality. Actually, many of them below mediocre. Money and special interest group grossly distort what citizens actually want. Politics has to be flexible because our world is flexible. But sometimes politicians really distort what they promise that they will do. Let us a little bit ponder on the questions and forget the rest. What is among this group of forget the rest? One, which is extremely dear to us, and of course it was mentioned in the Russell-Einstein Manifesto, the national sovereignty. Harari, in his book, 21st Lesson for the 21st Century, wrote, "Nationalism is not a natural and eternal part of the human psyche. It is not rooted in human biology." So very important, this is not like 2, 3 other things that we emphasized before: empathy, curiosity, and creativity. Interestingly, 150 years before, Charles Darwin wrote in his book, The Descent of Man, "As man advances in civilization and small tribes are united into largest, the simplest reason would tell each individual that he ought to extend his social instinct and sympathies to all members of the world, to all nations and all races." The idea of the so-called just world has been with us for millennia. And the Catholic Church actually, in the document Gaudium et Spes, Joy and Hope, written by St. Paul VI, emphasize that as long as the danger of war remains, and there is no competent and sufficiently power authority, then the government is actually obliged to do something to prevent, to defend their people. Pope Francis is much more, has changed that. These words of Paul VI are actually obsolete. One of the first things that Pope Francis wrote is, "This economy kills," is as bad as any of killing of the people, and it should be forbidden. And then in his last encyclica, Fratelli Tutti, on fraternity and social friendship, he says, and I will quote, "Development of a global community of fraternity calls for a better kind of politics, truly at the service of common goods." And this is exactly what Aristotle meant when more than 2,000 years ago, he emphasized politics is a master science aimed for social good. And Francis continues, "The marketplace by itself cannot resolve every problem. It is necessary to reform the UN and our economic institution. Some form of world authority regulated by law to provide for the common good, the elimination of hunger and poverty. Each of us is fully a person. We are part of the people. There are no people without respect for other person. A love capable of welcoming differences. Disagreement may give rise to conflicts, but uniformity proves stifling and leads to cultural decay. Politics must make room for a tender love of others. Religions should be at the service of fraternity of the world." We see that this is unfortunately not so. No one is useless, he emphasized, and no one is expendable. Never again war. The demand, "Remember your humanity," requires knowledge, education, creativity, curiosity, empathy, and solidarity. And we can and should forget about profit, our own arrogance, vanity, and if we can, we should suppress our stupidity. Transforming our world and ourselves has to be human and humanity-centered. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Academician Klaus. I have to say that we at the Croatian Association of the Club of Rome feel very privileged and grateful that we have such a distinguished scholar and such an impressive thinker amongst our ranks, and that we also have access to your knowledge and experience and your ideas. Thank you once again for that. Thank you for your introduction to this conference. Academician Klaus, it's always a pleasure to see you and to have you at our events, even if it is via Zoom. Thank you once again. Now, the first panel, the introductory panel. Okay, we should go there. Yeah. Okay, yes. Yeah. first panel of this conference, Future of Peace. It's called The Future of Peace, Challenges and Opportunities. And I have to say, as a short introduction, it has been many years ago since Professor Bandov, who is the driving force behind this conference, told me the idea of peace, the topic of peace, the future of peace is one of the most, if not the most important issue that social sciences can deal with in the world today and in the future. And this was long, long before Ukraine. And somehow, especially we in European Union and people in Northern America and in countries that haven't had war at their borders for a long time, of course, Southeastern Europe and Balkans too. But we somehow forgot that peace is not a certain given, that the future of peace is not a certain given, and we have been cruelly reminded on that by Russian invasion of Ukraine. But it was one more confirmation of Professor Bandov's idea that this is the issue and the topic that we should be dealing with. And for that, we're also very grateful that you're all here at this conference and that we're able to organize this conference with exactly that idea in mind. So for the first panel, this is the first evening introductory panel. So I think that it would be in order to try to at least address, if not answer, that would maybe be too optimistic and too ambitious, but to at least address some of the key questions that we have concerning the issue of peace and the role of academia in peace. So, what are the key challenges that we're facing for the future, and what are the key challenges for peace today and for future? And how can academia respond to these challenges? And maybe even more importantly, is it responding to these challenges as we speak? What is the influence of academia on decision-making procedures, on politics? What is the influence of academia on people, on public communication, on public debate, especially now with social media and internet-based media, where everyone has finally gotten their 15 minutes of fame or 15 minutes of having the, taking part in the public discussion, the public debate, with consequences that cannot be foreseen or planned or even contained, even if they're terrible for that public debate itself. And then maybe a bit more controversially, is the academia able to influence things that I mentioned? Is it itself performing in a way that would, warranted to really have an influence on peace and on the future? But not to make this a monologue, I am very proud to introduce our two introductory speakers. Sitting here next to me is Donovan Hajdukovic. Mr. Hajdukovic is a member of the Croatian Parliament. He is the president of the European Affairs Committee in our parliament, so the Royal Committee, if I am allowed to say so, as a former vice chair of that same committee. And Mr. Hajdukovic is definitely one of the most prominent Croatian politicians of the younger generations, and we're very glad to have you here at our conference. Our second speaker is Mr. Ivan Maric, who is the cabinet advisor to the Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of Croatia. He deals mostly with Western Balkans and security issues, and has finished conflict studies in Berlin and Augsburg in Germany. If you've read the agenda thoroughly, you might have noticed that there's also one more speaker that we should have had. That is Professor Maria Mateo Pamies. I haven't had the chance to ask her how she pronounces her name in the end, so I'm just going on a limb here. From the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. Unfortunately, due to the problems that the Deutsche Lufthansa AG is going through right now, Professor Pamies is not here with us at the moment, but we're looking forward to her arrival
Yeah, she's in the moment she's in taxi. She took a taxi now a couple of minutes ago.
Yeah, that takes like an hour.
Maybe she will
Yeah,
arrive.
okay,
in
so
one
maybe
moment.
we'll be
Maybe.
lucky to have her at some point. But for now, Mr. Pendukovic and Mr. Maric, the floor is yours. And Mr. Pendukovic, you start to do.
Well, thank you, Igor, for that flattering introduction. What can I say to that? I mean, I'm a member of parliamentary royalty. But joking aside, now thinking about the future of peace and actually listening to the Mr. Strauss, he said that the wars are obsolete. Apparently, that is not the case, judging by the recent developments in East of Europe. But I think that the element who actually disproved this theory is what he mentioned in the continuation when he talked about stupid, ignorant, lazy, and short-sighted politicians. So, talking about the future of peace, we also have to talk about politics and the politicians, but we also have to talk about academia and members of academia and their influence on the politicians, the decision makers. Now, when talking about academia's influence in politics, one must bear in mind that the situation in Central and Eastern Europe, I would say almost prevalently, but maybe not the rest of Europe, is that members of academia are very often politicians. So they are involved directly by being either MPs, members of the executive, or on the local level of government. That is the one perspective one needs to look at. The second perspective is, of course, the influence the academia wields in general public. Is it via influential, well thought of speakers who sometimes voice their opinions, as our friend Professor Van der Ries, for example, who is very often asked by Croatian media to comment on the international developments? Or is it more indirect influence that the academia has on the political processes? What are the indirect processes? Well, all politicians more or less have graduated from university, not all, let's say majority. So the professors, members of the academia are still people who shape them, people who are in contact with them, and people who sometimes, some politicians do reach out and ask for opinion, even if usual misconception may be that they don't. So, when talking about academia, I would say that the direct and indirect influences must be observed. The question that may be, and should be maybe addressed at this conference, maybe in my deliberations in the days to come, is whether the academia is doing enough. And what should academia do if it is not doing enough? So, again, depending on each country and each country's approach, political traditions, even academic traditions, academia has been present in public, let's say, in more prominent or less prominent. I can talk about for example, the situation in cases that are close to me, for example, Croatia, where certain members of academia do wield quite an influence in the media or even outside the media, so in this indirect way. But some other countries maybe not. So that may not be the case. But in general, I believe, and I will just talk about because, as we said, this is not intended as a monologue, but rather an dialogue, or at least a episode. To wrap up, in my view, the academic influence in politics has usually been a good one, in the sense that it creates I would say, pressure, because politicians only function under pressure, own experience, create pressure for reforms, for doing things differently, or perpetuating good and reformatist approaches in politics. This can be, as I said, done again in direct or indirect way, but we can maybe discuss those more in detail if you're interested later. And the question whether the academia is doing enough or what academia can do to facilitate more debates about peace, the future of peace, and facilitating peace. Maybe, and this is my final thought I wish to leave you with, the history of this institution is one of the answers what academia can do to facilitate peace and dialogue. Because as we heard at the beginning, this institution was founded with the intention of actually bringing together members of the academia from the Eastern and the Western blocks at the time. I'm sure you've heard this before, but this is not, I'm not being, too emotional when I say that after 24th of February, the world, when it comes to international relations, is not the same. Maybe such institutions as this one is will be needed again in order to facilitate dialogue and facilitate the discussions about peace and future peace. Of course, in my view, peace has no alternatives. War is usually a process in which all the sides involved lose. But that remains still to be seen with the latest development of the peace. So this is the few thoughts I had to share with you at the beginning.
Thank you very much. And now, Mr. Maric, for yours, and then I suggest after we hear Mr. Maric's introductory remarks, then we open the floor for discussion and for further.
So good day to everyone. I'm very honored to be here in Dubrovnik and this beautiful venue here. As mentioned, it's a venue that was formed 50 years ago as a venue for striking a dialogue between West and East, and it's really I'm very privileged to be here. As we heard, the academic perspective and perspective from decision makers and politicians, as a practitioner of foreign policy at the creation of the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs, I would like to just say something about peace as such in these times of uncertainty. Somebody would say that talking about peace after the 24th of February is maybe not the topic that we strive for, but I think that the title of this panel, Challenge and Opportunities, is exactly what we need to talk about. First of all, I would address the challenges that we have today. We live in a world right now where a couple of taboos or unthinkable developments are broken. First, I would say that war is not a need for political goals, for achieving political goals. As we saw in Ukraine, it's a taboo that was broken. Of course, we can say before that you had different examples like this region, like Croatia and surrounding countries. Also, we had a case of Georgia and the annexation of Crimea before that, but this is a fundamental change that came with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and how to talk about peace in times of war. That's the first step. The second one, when the West as such is challenged. It's challenged in fundamental ways which was not seen since the fall of the Berlin Wall. As we all know, we had different theories and histories there that liberal democracy and peace, especially in the most important countries, the Western countries, is just a question of time that everybody will be like the West. As we see, there are alternative models to the Western hegemony as such, and we can see that the goal that there are alternatives. It's no alternative like it was just maybe 1 year ago. The third thing is also a question of peace, because we have many theories from academia which say that economic interconnection, globalization as such, will lead to more peaceful means of resolving problems and so on. As we see, it's not the case. Russia and Ukraine are very much intertwined, not only economically, but I'm speaking about economics, and still war was possible. So we have three taboos that were broken. First of all, no war, no alternative, and no sustainable growth, that we will get each year, each decade, more and more interconnected. And so from there, these are the challenges, and I would argue, and I really much would like to hear more from you and from our colleagues here, how to use this context as an opportunity for developing such, because peace showed itself as a very successful model not to make war, especially in the West, because the West is still the most developed part of the world, where human rights, institutions, rule of law are respected, and maybe it's an opportunity for the West to be aware of its strengths, because there are many who say that after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the West had no challenge. If you have no challenge, you get lazy, you get bored. Who challenged you? You are the one, the first one. Now it's an opportunity to get those strengths back again. A second point about the role of academy. As a practitioner of foreign policy and as a diplomat, I see from the day-to-day business is quite hectic. You have a lot of data to process and so on, and the role of academia and scientists could be very, very useful. And because they have their profession is to think about complex topics in a depth that, for example, practitioners as myself are not always able to do. And I would maybe raise an example about John Mearsheimer, who is now famous for his stance on the Russian aggression against Ukraine, with an alternative view. But he's an example of how he reached a large audience because he took academic concepts from complex topics to a simple way to communicate. It's not only that the Russians use them for their own purposes, but they use his knowledge to reduce the complexity of topics to reach the general public. And I think that academy can do that too, and not to just be sometimes lost in complex topics which are not understandable for also decision makers, for practitioners, and for the general public as such. So I would leave it with that, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manis, as well, for your introductory remarks. We have, according to our agenda, we have just under half an hour for discussion. I will open the discussion. I will also try to take into account our participants via Zoom. Please give us some sort of sign if you want to take part. Is there a button, raise your hand? There's a raise your hand button somewhere on your somewhere there on your screen, so please use it. Or just shout if I don't see you. And with this, I open the floor for discussion. We have the first hand.
Thank you. My name is Phil. I'm from England, an organisation called World Beyond War. So I want to thank you all for organising this. It's very true that peace is very much the issue of our time, but the issue of all time. If we take it that there can be no sustainable development without peace, there can be no peace without sustainable development, that underlines the importance. I particularly like the focus around the issue of war and the abolition of war. Like all social scientists, I think it's important how we define our terms. So when we're talking about war, it's really important to think about war and the institution of war, which is the biggest problem. Not just war in terms of bombs that are dropping in a certain country, okay? Institution of war in terms of the preparation of war. This is, the military-industrial complex. 2 trillion is spent on preparing for war. Half of that comes from the US, by the way. So when we think of the institution of war like that, it really implicates us, and I really like how the professor spoke about we're all responsible or we're all implicated. So that really brings into question the role of, let's say, the West or the global North, because a lot of wars are often and sometimes prepared in the global North. Where are these countries where the wars are taking place getting their weapons from? That's a real question, which I think deserves answering. So I want to go on to that, the last question around we're all responsible or we're all implicated, and kind of push us, if that's okay, to be kind of critical. What is the role of academia in contributing to war? Okay, so I know we're going to talk a lot here about the role in contributing to peace, and believe me, I'm an academic, I'm also a practitioner, I work in this field, and it's important that we have peace science and things like this. But ask universities to turn the mirror inwards and ask themselves how much money are they getting to do research in certain organizations around the world? Okay, are they getting it from BAE Systems or other people who are investing in the war machine? And actually, there's lots of research that shows many universities are getting a lot of money to prop up and do their research. So there's the question, what is the role of academia in contributing to war?
Very, very good question. I think we'll come back to that question during the week as well. Would our panelists like to answer? I also think since you directly mentioned the clinician Klaus, if you would like to comment on that as well, feel free to do so. Dr. Klaus, hear me? Dr. Klaus, go ahead.
Was this, I did not hear the question, please.
Okay.
What is the role of academia in promoting peace, but also maybe contributing to war and the institution of war? Because there's research that shows many universities, lots of universities around the world, actually receive funding from the military-industrial complex to support their research.
There is no question that a lot of research done at the American university, for instance, and the same thing, of course, throughout the world, are supported by various military. For instance, when I was in the United States and I did basic research, the grant that I was on was supported by the American Navy. And there are thousands of examples like that. They are doing that in a way to somehow enter into this sphere of research. Now, you actually started a very important problem, namely, should we have research aimed to military purposes? My answer is, and that might surprise you, yes, because we don't know what are the possible adversaries we will face. However, this should not be under the control of any sovereign state, of any alliance, but it should be under the full control of UN. We have the UN, we are not using it properly, and we are doing almost everything to push it to a level as was the League of Nations. So absolutely, the situation we have now is far from satisfactory. It was like this throughout the history. Archimedes worked for his city. Fritz Huber was the person who developed poisonous gases during the First World War. He was the instigator of the famous document of '92 signed by outstanding German scientists. And let us not forget that Russell initiated to bring Sakharov to the Court of Justice, because after all, Sakharov did make the bomb. So what we have to do is, once we have the system which tolerates war, and this is the system we have now, this is the political system we have now, we are open to that. As Paul VI said, yes, then you are justified, blah, blah, blah. The thing is to absolutely change the political structure we have. emphasizing much more the UN, de-emphasizing any kind of alliances. NATO had a wonderful opportunity to really become something good in 1990, and unfortunately failed it completely.
Thank you very much. So, Phil, very interesting and thought-provoking questions. So, nice to have you here. Let's hear some more. This is being very. Do we have a hands up sign on Zoom screen? No? Professor Manda, please.
Okay. When we are talking about peace, then we are talking actually, or the public think we are talking actually on the negative aspect of peace. That means actually we have no violence. But the positive peace is the process we actually want to live. And the positive peace is actually to include justice, to include democracy, to include freedom. And that's something what we actually need in the world. In the moment when we are living in the period of aggression, of Russian aggression on Ukraine, of course we are thinking how to stop the war. That was the case, for example, when we are talking about Bosnia Dayton Agreement. These kind of agreements are necessary, but after it, we need actually to find another solution for those societies. We need actually to live sustainable peace. And in the moment, we are talking mostly only on this negative aspect of peace. And if we need to find solution for sustainable development and sustainable peace, we need much more cooperation between academia and practitioner. And that is something what we actually miss. And that is, according to my opinion, the problem of academia. Academia is not ready to include practitioner in our team, and we need practitioner. Allow me only short story. We were in Israel. I took my students in Israel. That was probably 5-6 years ago, and it started bombarding Jerusalem. And I talked with my students what we had to do and what we had to do. And I said, according to Papa, and they said, okay, yeah, we'll do that. And then our ambassador, Croatian ambassador in Israel, told me, okay, my dear friend, this everything is quite good, but that's everything by the book. But in reality, he spoke with my students what they had to do. That's my phone number. Call me, and I will call my Israel colleague, and he will come to help you. And I have diplomatic code, I know the security code, everything by the book, but without experience. And a friend of my ambassador, he has experience, what to do. So we need much more cooperation between the practitioner and academicians, between the local staff, the people that are in the fields, and universities. Without that, we can't success. One of very good examples is actually Rotary system. It is the system of the Rotary Peace Centers. I'm talking, because I see a couple of guys here from this structure of Rotary Peace system. And this is probably one of something what we have to include in academic world as well. When we are talking about Rotary Peace system, here I see actually two guys next to me. Maybe they will talk about that. My good friend Martin Scott and my good friend Phil Gittens are here. And I think this is something what we need to include, not only in couple of universities, this kind of system, cooperation between practitioner and university in promoting the peace, in advocacy for peace. We need to do that actually in all universities, in all academic institutions. If you were ready only shortly about this. Yes, please.
Yeah, and I'm sure Scott as well can talk a lot about this. I'm totally in agreement, nodding the head, massively. There's a lot of need to better mix academia and practitioners. But it's not to say that both have their own expertise and skills, which is really, really valued. Because sometimes academics look at practitioners from afar and say, we're the academics, we're the theorists, we do the concepts. And then practitioners are sometimes guilty of the same. I try and live in both worlds, so I see it, both worlds. The practitioners will look at the theorists and go, yeah, you're just theorists, you don't understand what happens in practice. They both have expertise and a skill set and need to be working with and learning from each other. So Rotary Peace Centres is a good example of that. And I'll just share one example linked to why I'm really impressed about the focus of this get together on war abolition. I had a PhD and I did a Rotary Peace Fellowship, and I never looked at the abolition of war. We focused on, let's be peaceful, I'm a psychotherapist by trade. Let's be peaceful with ourselves, let's be peaceful with each other. Well, let's not talk so much about war though, let's leave that to the security experts. War and the abolition of war is by far the biggest challenge we have to sustainable peace on the planet. It's of course the main risk of the nuclear apocalypse, but also it's the main risk to climate change. People don't know that. The biggest polluter on the planet and the biggest consumer of fossil fuels on the planet is the military, and particularly the US military. So if we want to make progress on climate change, we have to look at the war system. So, and by the way, with the idea of academics, practitioners, I will speak a little bit about that tomorrow, by the way, so thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes. I'll add the importance of doing our work in the fields. So later I'll get a chance to speak about the work we're doing in Ukraine around trauma-informed peace building, understanding the role of trauma, how that affects the brain and conflict. And looking at the work I've been doing in indigenous communities in Canada with First Nations. And I was speaking with an elder because I would never go into community and teach community as an outsider without speaking with an elder. And one of the examples is she listens very carefully and she says, well, okay, Martin, but what you're talking about is not a value of ours, it's a law. It's one of their laws. And its law reads, which means you listen with a compassionate heart. And you're careful not to hurt the heart of others. Sounds like great advice. Why is it a law? Well, when you look at what happens to your brain when you're in conflict or experience trauma, you don't remember positive stories. You only remember the threats in your environment. So if you're a narrative culture that doesn't write anything down, what happens to your community if you're only remembering the threats? Turns out that's not just good advice in narrative communities. As we look around, the problem we're having politically, we're not remembering the positive stories about each other. And our society is falling apart as a result. So that's the kind of work you can only find and discover when you're working in communities, not as an academic, not as someone coming in to teach someone. The first thing I did was I spent time on site to get there. Say, well, Mark, what are you doing there? I'm doing nothing. I'm doing absolutely nothing. Because I don't know what the purpose of being is, what the purpose of being on land is. So it didn't have an academic purpose, didn't have the goal in mind for being on property, on land. But it served that purpose because I wouldn't have that conversation unless that had happened.
Often when I think about the war, we refer to states fighting each other. But according to my understanding, a war is also a lack of social cohesion. And this is very important because in the most of Western societies, we have far-right radical parties coming to power, which means that they represent the will and the interests of some very radical groups that perceive the world quite different.
And regardless of what happens far away, it doesn't change the attitude that they have towards those people. In the case of Poland, it didn't change anything for Morawiecki government. What are Afghani refugees going through to get there? Not allow them to enter in the border, for instance, in Poland. Not even to accept them, preventing the media from getting there with cameras. The second is the case of the AfD and how actually theoreticians became practitioners. Because if you look at how the AfD was founded, it was founded by academics, right? It was founded by a very group of bright German economists that believed that what is happening in Germany is not right. And then what you have a party. It is true that later on most of them moved on from the party, but what happened is that you had a party which became the third largest party in the German parliament, representing 13.7% of the voters, who, let alone that didn't care about refugees, they were internally against anything that represented whatever foreign. So that's what I'm saying. If you have this classical conception of war, where countries just fight with each other, I think we are missing a lot. Therefore, my belief is that we have to focus on what actually happens within our societies as a means of preventing what might possibly occur. And we have so many lessons to see that. One more example? Very interesting as well, for me at least. What happened with, what was the name of the university in Hungary, Budapest? It was yeah, so this was the case of which I was following closely, because back then I was studying strategy in Estonia and they were partner universities. And this is literally a university, a group of professors that actually went against the system, went against the government, went against the censor that the system was trying to impose upon them, on the ideas that they had, right? And there you have it. So how do you deal with that then? Yeah, that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Would you like to just
Okay. Yeah, only a short reaction. I think it's very interesting what you spoke about Alternative Deutschland. Because, actually, when we are talking, most people talk about academicians behind this euro, everything started with euro crisis. It was, we don't like euro anymore, we like now Deutschmark back. So, but that was without any support. But interesting point was actually what we have in Europe in the moment, and that is that's actually the question of the role of academic community and how academic community reacts if some foreign forces, if some foreign actor come to your country and said, we will support you. Because, everything what's happened with Alternative Deutschland is not actually a German thing. Some come and supported those ideas, spread those ideas. And it is not, it's not, there's everything happening in Dresden. And yeah, probably we all know who worked in Dresden. Probably. It is not, you need to do that much deeper. It is not only the level who is in the front, because I'm more interested in who is behind those guys. Yeah, but the point is great. Yeah, because this is actually very important for you.
So what I wanted, I'll relate to that real quickly, because and I'm going to include media here because it is very important, right? Generally, people that rule media are quite educated people that come from academia. It is almost impossible to become a high-ranking person in any kind of public or private broadcaster, in any kind of important media in Europe. And if you look at how the voters in the eastern part of Germany supported the AfD, and you try to explain where that support is coming from, you see that it's coming from the certain manipulation that people in the media are making. The main excuse, if you look at surveys that were made and why they supported the AfD there, was that they are threatening our job places, they are trying to threaten our culture, therefore, so on and so forth. But when you look at statistics, you see that actually the number of immigrants of foreigners that are looking for jobs in the areas, into India, for instance, where they got major support, are almost non-existent. But that was a vision that was implanted by the media, again, by people that are highly educated, and yes, serve different agendas.
Federico?
Yes. So I want to start maybe from something that Mrs. said, because I'm a former peace practitioner and turned to academy leading, and it is true probably that war is a social construct, and as I understand, Professor Schlaus was using this idea as implying that being something not natural can be something that we can alienate from our social experience, but also democracy and human rights in social classrooms. See, just because something is not natural, whatever that means, doesn't mean that it's not something deeply influential and deeply defining of what is our social experience. So I think in the peace movement and among peace activists and in academia as well, there is this more bias that just because something has a higher moral content is destined to prevail. And it's not true. Like, the world is full of good ideas that are not so performative, and because they're not so performative, in the end they fade. If today in 2022 we're still here and we still have to cope with topics like war or it's because it is still a viable option for people. It's still something that more or less brings results to certain agendas. And we can ignore that our relations as social groups are defined by driven to self-actualization as as social groups. Like, we think we have an idea on how the world should be, and we strive for that idea to be actualized, and not always these ideas are reconcilable with one another. I think the role of academia under these circumstances is to keep the balance in terms of production of critical and good knowledge in this regard, because I think there is an excess of advocacy in these topics. Like, especially liberal, progressive thinking people that like to ride around the flag saying that peace is a good thing. Like, we all know that, don't we? I think the role of academia is to produce experimentalist knowledge that is able to operationalize rather than advocate for good ideas. And we talked about populism, and I think we've seen this tendency of getting a reactor to populism, the current way of populism, meaning that a lot of academicians were more interested in judging populism rather than understanding it. If we keep treating people that take decisions we don't like as a bunch of morons because we think they are manipulated or we think that they are misguided, probably we are not doing our job as academics in proposing a better understanding of the world. That's it.
Thank you very much.
We also have
Okay, thank you. My name is Jordan and I'm from Tirana. Basically, it's very important topic that we are talking about, and I thank you very much for allowing me to be part of this activity. Thank you, Professor, for organizing such great panels. Well, I think we all understand that academia is the one who supports science and research and everything, and research is everything that produces for humanity, including war machines. So we know that, and it has been like this since the beginning when people started making things. But at the same time, I think that it is the proper time to rethink about academic freedom and ethics. I think if you refer to ethics, and I can just recall the various around operational freedom, academic freedom, and research freedom. And I think that's the key point. So although we may produce many tools for the politicians and for humanity that can be used to restore peace or to secure peace, at the same time, I think we can see ourselves also as being very responsible on what we write and what we invent or try to convince people, because we all know that, especially in the Balkan area, fortunately now we don't have wars, but wars have been produced mostly by some people who used to be academicians, who used to write some really massive papers who, on the name of nationalism, and I think it was crazy, it's not nationalism, they developed even ethnic cleansing platforms and everything. So I think by recalling ethical principles of research and the academia itself, I think we can, this is the first step. So if we want to see an academia responsible for securing and developing peace, we should start with this. So we cannot allow ourselves to be misused by different mechanisms that are producing wars or conflicts. And of course, social conflicts are the basis for everywhere. So we have to be a little bit open to accept the wider concept of war, especially in the current world, which is a fully globalized level of war. And hopefully this topic will be covered by someone, but personally I will be covering a topic regarding teaching human rights, and human rights as a human rights, education as a right. So I think it's one of the ways that we can make people more knowledgeable, more open, without bias, etc. So this is the fundamental base.
Cool, thank you very much. I think that time really flies when you're having fun, and our time is up. I will allow just a bit more time for our introduction panelists to sort of wrap up this introductory session. I will also allow myself, before they give them one first conclusion of this session, and that is that we are in for a great week, I think, which I'm really looking forward to. And now, Ivan and first environment.
So thank you all for this interesting input. I would refer myself to what Professor Bando said about negative and positive peace. As an absence of violence, and positive peace is something more than that. And what I've heard from you is more about positive peace. So the fundamental things that make a society peaceful, successful, and developed, like democracy, like rule of law, like freedom, like representing what an individual and the collective as such also wants and needs, and we see that peace is much more complex than that. It's not only about war, about machines, about research on war. It's also about something more. And I think as somebody representing Croatia, as a EU and NATO country, we are part of the West as such, although not everything in the West is perfect, but still it's an area of the world which is still a role model and example for a large parts of the world, especially working on the positive peace topics inside their own countries, like I mentioned, challenges in Germany and in other countries as such. I think we still have the Western, and I would say also being Dubrovnik and Croatia, European values are more and more important in these times of uncertainty and challenging this positive, not only the negative piece, but also the positive. So thank you all.
Just a few thoughts from me at the end. I found this discussion very stimulating, and it got me thinking actually. Academia is very powerful, but this power can go both ways. Because thinking about AfD in Germany actually reminded me, because I'm a historian by profession, reminded me of the similar situation we had in Germany not so long ago. Most prominent members of the Nazi Party were extremely educated people, with a few exceptions, fewer some of the other top class. This serves as an example how academia can be influential, but this influence can go both ways, promoting war or promoting peace. And actually, I found this reverse perspective. So we are talking about peace. Let's talk about the war. Very enlightening, so to say. Academia has theorized about the future of conflicts after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I think that the most established view was that it will be a clash of civilizations. Obviously, that view is obsolete. Maybe it will be an inter-civilizational clash rather than the clash between the civilizations. But talking about war and using the term civilized war, I find it a contradiction in terms. War is the negation of civilization. And what academician Klaus rightly said, we are a society that tolerates war. Because we have been prepared for war, society-wise, economy-wise, public opinion-wise. Unfortunately, we are used to tolerate war. And it's very interesting to look at how Western society is more tolerant about war, let's say, in Syria or Yemen or other remote, so to say, non-usually Western part of the world clashes, rather than war in Ukraine or that threat. But war in Yemen has been going over 50 years, I think. So, we're talking about weapons of mass destruction. They are envisioned as deterrent. But what happens when you have an unscrupulous person who is willing to use it? So not only as a deterrent, not only as a threat, really willing to use it. When we have, let's say, Trump in Washington with his finger on the weapon, or we have Putin, who maybe when he starts losing the war, will think about using the weapons of mass destruction seriously because he has nothing to lose. So these are all the challenges in one way or the other. And perhaps what we haven't mentioned really in this discussion is the misinformation, fake news. Igor mentioned it in the introduction, the social media, with lots of outlets in which you can express your opinion. We are in a kind of cacophony of information, and it's not always easy to distinguish which information is true or very definite, so to say, which are true pieces of information and which are fake news. And what would be the solutions maybe what to ponder about during this week, in my view at least? So in my previous life before politics, I was a teacher. So I always think that education is the key. And education about human rights, education that tears down prejudice, is maybe the way to go. Not maybe, I'm certain that it is the way to go. And of course, academia has a vital role in this. But as educating colors that will be academicians, future academicians, but also educating people who are it's also very important. Interaction with practitioners is definitely important. And maybe just give you an example of good practice that we have in the Croatian Parliament. Our committees have what we call external or appointed members. These members are not elected MPs, but rather representatives of either NGOs or interested parties, let's say, to the work of the committee, or members of the committee. For example, in the Committee on Human Rights and Rights of National Minorities, we have two representatives of the religious communities. One is always Catholic, which is predominantly Catholic country, and the other on the rotational basis is representative of other religious group, and 2 representatives of the NGOs dealing with human rights. So this is also something which helps us in broadening our perspectives as direct decision makers, let's say legislators. What are the issues, what are the problems? We tend to be closed in our bubbles, academicians and politicians as well, and not to think outside of them or to be exposed to the problems outside. And finally, although it may sound corny, promotion and development of democracy. In the words of Winston Churchill, yeah, democracy has its flaws, but it's the best system we have. And education is also the key here. So we have to educate the future generations, not only what are their rights, but what are their obligations towards the society, and especially peace-loving and peace-caring society. So with this, thank you for your attention. I found this very stimulating, and tomorrow will be an opportunity to further take this session. Thank you.
So, before the end, I have to say I feel very sorry for our participants via Zoom because they can't join us for the next step of this evening, and that's the reception that is being offered to us and organized for us by the University of Zagreb, which we are very grateful for. And we say hello in our thoughts to the rector of our university. Sorry, he couldn't be with us here, but we have, Professor Bando, representing, among other things, also the University of Zagreb here. Our Zoom participants, we will then have to drink your drinks. I'm sorry. Better luck next time. And before we go downstairs, it's in the in the garden in the middle. Before we go, just a few organizational information by Professor.
Okay, it's actually not so good. He said already the ceremony, opening ceremony started already. But I will try to be very quick. So first, on Friday we have free day. It's actually not a free day. Friday is actually the day where we can think about projects. When we started, Doomsday started with this conference, and we saw actually a lot of people coming here from different disciplines, different regions, and we thought maybe we can start some cooperation on some projects, or maybe different projects. Maybe you can think what is a project in your region, and maybe you can include someone from this group. So please be smart and use this option to mingle with people, to see about the options for some project cooperation in the future. On Friday, we will have time to think about it. We will have probably Martin Bartel with us. He will be with short introduction per Zoom about options. He's from Berlin, and he has already some ideas about the project. So please think already today what capacities from you or your organization to involve in some project, in which project will be interesting to you involved. That's the first. Second, when we are talking about the beauty of a city, or important institutions for this city and connected with our topic, that's the peace. In Dubrovnik, we have peace. We have actually the War Museum. The War Museum is up on the mountain. If you want to join to the group on Tuesday, we will organize some tour up to the mountain and to visit the War Museum. We think it's really important, but it is optional. It is it's not free. We discussed now about amounts and about some discounts. We usually get some discounts, and we need discount actually not for the museum. Museum is actually cheap, but the cable car. We need to go up with the cable car, and that's actually not so cheap. So we are trying to get some discount, and probably we will have information tomorrow. But when I spoke about peace, that's about museum. But in museum, if you see museum and if you go up in museum, it's amazing view to the Elephant Islands. Elephant Islands, it's amazing view in sunset. So think to do that, because it's really amazing view. But of course, you're going there because this important museum. It's not everything, of course. Tomorrow we will start in 9 o'clock. You know that everyone. Probably you all read the program and the welcome letter and everything. You know everything also. So, but tomorrow we will start in 9. Please be here 10 minutes before 9. Then in 9 we will start directly to our presenters. Breakfast is from 7:30. If you want to eat something early, it's fine. People will be already there, but in 7:30 it's official. And I have one last conclusion, and this is actually something again about beauty of this city. Emma is here. She's of course beauty, but I didn't want to think about Emma. I want to think about possibility to, with Emma, to visit old city of Dubrovnik. Emma is my former student. Emma is my friend. Is probably already all here. But Emma is my friend, and Emma is local from Dubrovnik. And after reception, she will be ready to take you involved. It's not official tour guide tour. If you want, you can book it. But she is ready to show you what is actually important in the city, which restaurants you have to avoid or to join, to go, and which. Okay. Thank you, Emma, for this option. My dear friends, welcome you once again in the name of the university and in my name. Please go and join. I think our wine is not anymore cold.